Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome to a little training session on D&D. So the goal of this video here is to explain what your options are during your turn as a player, and basically what I want the purpose of this to be is a dungeon master could send this to their players and they could walk into the game having a understanding of everything they can do during their turn. So with that said, the way we're going to break this up is we're going to have multiple levels. The first one being the raw basics of what's in a turn, and then we're going to get into an intermediate level where we're going to talk about the more advanced options available to you during your turn. And then in the last leg of the video, we're going to hit up the more advanced techniques, or nitty-gritty details rather. And yeah, once we've worked through all that, you'll hopefully be masters of your character's options during a fight. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. It's going to be focused on combat. My advice outside of combat for players is tell your dungeon master what it is you want to do, and they'll tell you what to roll or what you need to do in order to attempt to do the thing you're asking about. Never just go ahead and say, I'm rolling perception, and roll. Your dungeon master might be giving it to you already. They might not require a roll for the thing you want to do. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Always say what you want to do and then see what's required to do that thing. And that avoids any awkward pre-fired dice and leaving the dungeon master scrambling to figure out what they need to do. Alright, so with that aside, couple key things that we're going to touch on. So first is the resource that I'm going to be linking in the video description as well. This here is a cheat sheet that's available. Someone made this up. It's a quick reference that you can pull up. It's browser based and it's super handy. You can click on any of these options and they will give you a full rundown, all the details, everything you need to know. They'll source where the information came from. And we're going to be using that as the key part of our guide as we work through today. So to start off, the very, very core things that you can do on your turn. You've got your actions in a round of combat. So you have your movement, which is something you can do anytime during your turn. You can actually break it up between your bonus action and your action. So you could move 10 feet, take your action, then move 20 feet. You have your action, which is once per turn. There's a bunch of different examples. It's going to be your most commonly used thing during a round. To attack, to help someone out, all those kinds of things require an action. Now, some of your classes might have special bonus actions that they can do. For example, a thief is able to disengage, they can dash, they can hide, all as bonus actions. Spellcasters might have spells which have a bonus action cast time, and I'll go a little bit more in depth on spells in another video. And I'll explain the nuances with spells right now, actually. So the thing to know about bonus action-based spells is you can still cast another thing on your turn, but it has to be a cantrip. So you can never cast two spells on your turn, but you can cast a spell that's a bonus action and a cantrip. Yeah, and then other examples would be like drawing your weapon at the start of a battle, if you didn't already have it out. The last thing that you get in a round of combat is your reaction. So one time outside of your turn, sometimes you can act. A couple of these options are an attack of opportunity. So if your opponent tries to run away from you and doesn't do so safely, you get to take a free swipe at them. And the other one is if you've prepared a action that has a trigger, you use your reaction to actually do it. So that's related to the ready action process, which I'll get into a little more depth in a moment here. Yeah, so that's the very basic first step that you get. That's very basic understanding of things, and we'll touch on a couple of the most basic things that you'll do on your turn. I think the most common one that you're going to see is the attack. So your attack is made of two things. When you're using the attack action, you have to roll to see if you hit, and then you roll damage. So if we zoom in here on my two little tokens here, so we have this this guy, we'll call him Matt. I'm just going to add his name under him. Yeah, so we have Matt coming in, and he's going to attack his teacher here. Little sparring session kind of deal. So Matt would roll a d20, and he would add any of his combat bonuses. So if you were using a strength-based weapon, like a battle axe or a long sword or a club, you would add your proficiency bonus if you're proficient in the weapon, and your strength modifier to it. So let's say Matt has a proficiency bonus of 2 and a strength modifier of 3 with his longsword. So we had roll, and he only rolled a 7. So that is not enough to overcome the teacher's defenses. This would be referred to as the armor class, and that's calculated a bunch of different ways. One thing to note is if you tie, I believe, attack tied. Let me see, I should have looked this up before I started recording. It's a good thing I do this casually. Yeah, so the attacker, so on attack rolls, a tie goes to the attacker. So if he had rolled something like a 15 and his armor class was 15 here, the attack would have hit. So I'm just gonna put a little note beside him. AC equals 15. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so Matt isn't successful here. Now, let's say hypothetically he did roll 15 or above. Then we would move into rolling his damage. So all weapons are going to have a different damage dice associated with them. You can find it in Chapter 5 of the Player's Handbook. And depending on what kind of modifier you're using, so a dex versus a strength-based weapon, you'd be adding your ability modifier bonus to it. So in our case, Matt has a +3 on his strength, so with his longsword, he rolls 12 damage. He delivers a pretty crushing hit to his teacher there, if he had hit. Now, let's say Matt were using a dexterity-based weapon, then he would just use the other stats. So that would be something like a dagger, a rapier, a short sword, or most ranged weaponry. So yeah, that's a very basic thing on attack. So you roll to see if you hit. Check with your DM if you did. They won't Generally, they won't tell you what the armor class is. They'll just let you know yes or no. So you have to kind of parse it out yourself. And then once it's been confirmed, you roll your damage. Now, let's say Matt also had a dagger in his other hand. So he can actually use his bonus action to make an attack with his offhand weapon. Which would just be another... with a weapon that's dex-based, you can use it as a strength-based weapon. It has something called the finesse trait, which lets you use your dex with it, but you can use your strength with it as well. Yeah, so when you attack with a offhanded weapon, you don't get the ability bonus on the damage. So in this case, Matt would add his 5 for the attack with his offhand dagger, and he hits it. And then he would roll a d4 and add his... Oh wait, no, he wouldn't add it. He would just roll the base damage. Wow, with damage that high, it's like Matt's trying to kill his teacher here. Well, alright, so Matt's damage aside, there is a fighting style you can take. With many of the classes, they have the option to have like specified fighting styles. And if you take the 2-weapon fighting, then you would get the damage bonus as well. Yeah, so that covers the basics of launching an attack. Some spells work this way as well, something like a firebolt. You roll and then you add your bonuses and see if you hit. Alright. Yeah, so Matt uses his action to attack. Let's see, what other actions would you consider a basic? Dodge is a big one. So let's say you didn't think you could overcome the defense, you're just trying to be an upfront tank. You could use the dodge action, which makes all incoming attacks against you have disadvantage. So the way disadvantage works is when you do your attack roll and you roll your d20, you would roll 2 and you take the lower number. And where there's disadvantage, there's also advantage. So if you were attacking someone and you had advantage on your attack, you would roll 2 d20s and you would take the higher number as the true result of the attack. One last one I'll mention, or yeah, two more I'll mention in kind of like the basics. Using an object, so some magical items will just say you use your action to do this, or maybe there's a lever that you need to pull in the middle of battle to open a door or something. Your dungeon master might require an action for you to do that. And then you could also ready an action, so you could say, let's say you had a bow out and you're right here, you knew the enemy was coming. You say, okay, I take out my bow, and when something turns that corner, I want to shoot it. So your character's ready to do the attack, and they're waiting for the trigger. They have set a catalyst for their action to happen. So when the teacher comes around the corner, they can choose to take their attack using their reaction. So they're attacking outside of their turn, using their reaction to complete that prepared attack. Alright, so those are the basics for the attack. You won't see any basics for a bonus action, but reaction is definitely one to highlight here. So again, let's say they're having an especially nasty sparring session here between Matt and his teacher, and his teacher's taking a real ass kicking here. and he just wants to back off. So he starts, instead of using his action to disengage, he takes a swing at Matt, and then he tries to run away. So this is where the attack of opportunity comes in. Basically, when you're in melee, you kind of have a circle of threat around you, right? So you could launch an attack at anything in this circle around Matt here, in this case. So he's got a sword. He has that sword has 5 feet of range. So when his teacher tries to leave his area that he's threatening, without taking the proper precaution, Matt gets a free attack against his teacher. And you would just resolve that with as if it were a normal attack. But doing so takes a reaction, and you only get one of those per turn. And there's certain special features you can take. That can actually stop the movement when someone tries to move away from you. Or you can, if someone approaches you as well, I believe there's a feature to attack them as they come in, as well as try to get away. So there's a few different things you can do there. All right, so I would say that about covers the basic things you'll do. So let's get into the more intermediate things. So intermediate options, I would say, are things that start adjusting your movement, different things you can do. Dash, for example, if you use your dash action, it increases your speed for the turn. Basically, it doubles your speed. So if you were to use your dash action, and then let's say Matt had 30 feet of movement normally, as many characters do. Some have 25 instead. That would actually increase to 60 feet of movement. So you can really get boogieing if you use your action to dash. In some cases, you may want to disengage. So let's say Matt got pretty seriously wounded. He needs to back away, but he needs to do it safely. But his teacher also has this 5 feet of threat around him. So Matt would use his disengage action, and then he could move his 30 feet without getting attacked. Alright, so we're going to keep this going here. The help action. That's an important one. So, this works a couple different ways. So let's say Matt had a friend down here that's fighting alongside him. So his buddy here is able to use the help action to give Matt advantage against the creature that he's beside, or a creature that the person using help is beside. So as long as you're within 5 feet, you can do this. So let's say this guy, I can call him Jerry. So Jerry uses the help action on Matt. So Matt's next attack has advantage, as long as because Jerry is within 5 feet of Matt's target. So when Matt goes to make his attack, he would roll 2 d20s. He would take the highest result. He crit. Matt's really out to kill his teacher tonight. Man, rolling so well. I wish this were in an actual game. Yeah, so if that's one instance of help as a combat action, and the other way would be Matt could use the help action on target gains advantage on the next roll against a creature within 5 feet of you. Yeah, so Matt could do this as well. Matt could use the help action on his teacher, which would give Jerry advantage on his ranged attack. So there's a couple little things you can do there. The last thing would be if, let's say they needed to climb a wall or something. Like, let's say there's no staircase here. They needed to grab something that was up on a ledge, and Matt couldn't reach it normally. He had to make an athletics check to climb the wall. Jerry could use the help action on Matt to give him advantage. And then Matt would, Matt would just make his roll, and hopefully it was successful. You might see this in cases where if you were let's say you were a mage, you had low strength, you weren't very good at climbing, but Matt's excellent at climbing, but you guys need to make sure that he's successful here. That would be where you want to use the help action. So continuing through, hide. So basically, as long as you're not in eyesight of a creature, you can basically you make a stealth check to set the difficulty of finding you, and if a creature is looking for you, they have to roll perception to see if they can find you when they're looking around for you. So to give a quick role play, let's say the teacher's coming after the healer here. I'm just going to give her Laura. I believe that's the name of the original character. That's art from Fire Emblem. Anyway, yeah. So let's say the teacher is coming after Laura and she needs to hide from him. So she can move to get in behind the building and then use her hide action. So let's say she's not proficient in it, but she's got okay dex, so she's going to get a +2. So she rolls a 20. So the difficulty, assuming she's like kind of like nestled into like the alleyway kind of thing, as the teacher comes around and he makes his perception check, he rolled a 6. He doesn't see Laura. He keeps running. He's like, where is she? I didn't see her, and carries on. And Laura's okay. So that's a quick rundown on how hiding works. And you don't have to do it. That's for in combat. Outside of combat, it's the same as making stealth checks and stuff. So your DM will know how they want to handle that. Another thing that you can do is search. So when you're searching, we'll go back to this example, but we'll reverse it. So the teacher is hidden himself. Let's say he's hiding up on the roof and he's been shooting down at the party. They can't find him. So they could use their search action during battle to see if they can spot him. And when they do this, they would make a perception check, which would be contested by his stealth check. And if they're successful, they'll spot him and they'll know where he is. Some class features use your action. Anything that's not covered is so like if you want to do some kind of wonky wild stuff, that'd be improvising. So that about covers the actions. Again, we go down to bonus actions here. We've kind of touched on them. It's just like certain features, certain spells use them. And then if you're someone that's in melee combat, you can use your offhand weapon if you're dual wielding to attack. And then reaction. Yeah, nothing else to cover there. Cool. I guess one other thing I'll cover in the intermediate section here is the addition of difficult terrain, along with all these other movement things. So yeah, looking at this, you have a bunch of different movement options, right? So there's the standard walking around where you're just, hi, my name's Matt, I move 30 feet in a turn. I get to just pop around. But what if they were fighting, let's say Laura was a druid, and she covered the ground in gnarled vines, and turned the ground into difficult terrain. So what that does to Matt now is every block of movement, which is normally 5 feet, is now 10 feet. So he can only move half the distance that he used to be able to move until he gets out of the vines. So that would be an example for difficult terrain. It just adds extra cost of movement. Let's see, other examples for movement-based things. Climbing. If it's a simple thing to climb, like there's clear handholds and everything, your dungeon master, or a ladder. A ladder is an excellent example. Climbing a ladder would cost you 10 feet of movement for every 5 feet you ascend the ladder. And then the same goes for, you get the same kind of scaling with swimming. So if you, if we had Matt out in the water here, he had to swim the water, swim across the river here. Every block would be 10 feet of movement. So Matt could cross this river in a turn. He could get to the other bank, but then that would be it for his movement. And if the water was especially rough, so in this example he's trying to cross a running river, he might have to make a athletics check to swim. And the same goes for if the climb was kind of difficult. So let's say instead of trying to climb a ladder, Matt was trying to climb the rocky side of the building here, like in our prior example. Same kind of situation where he might have to make a check. Yeah, and then the last thing to note is if your character's knocked prone, you can choose to crawl around, but for every square that you crawl, it's 10 feet of movement. If you choose to get up, it costs just flat half your movement. So if you have 30 feet of movement, it's 15. If you've got 40 feet, it's 20, etc., etc. Yeah, so that covers the intermediate options from this quick reference sheet. And the last thing to touch on would be kind of like the more nitty-gritty examples. So this is where we're going to cover the special attacks. We're going to talk about jumping, grappling, that kind of thing. So, yeah, we'll start with the movement options. So, another thing that you may not see it come up in your games, you may have never heard of people doing this, but you do have the option to just drop to your hands and knees. It doesn't cost you any movement, you can just do it. You can drop into a crawl for free, but it'll still cost you half your movement to get back up. Why might you want to do that? Well, when you're prone, people shooting at you have disadvantage while you're on the ground. But people making melee attacks against you have advantage. So, hypothetically, if you had some kind of skilled archer that was shooting at you from across a field and you couldn't even find the guy, you can drop to the ground and make it harder to hit you. As for the jumps, so when you're looking at doing jumping, There's a couple different rules to it. If you get a running start of 10 feet, you kind of get a flat bonus to things. So what I mean by that is if you're making a long jump and you have 10 feet of run time before you start your jump, the distance you can travel is just equal to your strength score. So Matt, for example, if he's getting a +3 on his strength rolls, he's probably got about 16 strength. So that means if Matt needed to clear, let's say Matt needed to jump this gap here, this 10-foot gap. So Matt has 10 feet of run, and then he makes a long jump. And because he has 15 or a strength score of 16 and he had that running start, he can just flat out travel that 16 feet and cross the gap. Now, if there's an obstacle or something in the way, your DM might require you to make an additional check. And then the last thing to note about the long jump is if you, let's say Matt were trying to do it from here, he would only get 8 feet of movement, of distance on his long jump because he didn't get the running start. Because you get half your strength score. But you can extend that range out a bit by having your character reach out. The details are in here. Where was it? Okay, yeah. So those are little details that your DM might bring into play. But yeah, Matt, if he's just like trying to make the leap, maybe he gets up on the battlement first and then he tries to make his standing long jump. He only gets 8 feet of movement. He'll probably need to make an athletics check to catch the edge and pull himself up, something like that. And then you have high jumps, which if you get that 10 feet running start, so let's say Matt needed to start climbing that wall, he'd run his 10 feet, and then he gets 3 feet of air plus your strength modifier. So in this case, it's another 3 feet, because that's what his strength bonus is. And he is able to reach up half of your height. So I'm just gonna say Matt's 3 feet or 6 feet tall. So he would run. He gets 3 feet normally plus 3 feet from his strength modifier, and then he's reaching up with his hands. So that gives him about 9 feet of vertical movement or vertical range. And then your DM might require you to make a strength score to like pull yourself up or that kind of thing. Yeah, so that covers the details around jumping. I'd recommend reading through these, kind of like refresh yourself if it was confusing, but I think I explained it well, hopefully. And if not, oops. All right. The other key thing I wanted to touch on are the special attacks. So there's grappling and shove. Yeah, so you can replace your attack action with a special melee attack called the shove. So basically, you can, if you're able to make multiple attacks, you can replace one of them with your attack action. So a lot of melee classes get a feature called extra attack that gives them 2 attacks in one turn. So you could swap one of those out. Your shove, the creature can't be more than one size larger than you. So these two are the same size, but let's say you had a little halfling that was 3 feet tall trying to shove an ogre. It doesn't work. You can't make the shove action. Yeah, you make the... instead of rolling to attack the creature, what you do is you make a strength check, and then the creature can choose to either use their strength or dexterity, and you two have a roll off. And the winner of the roll off, if it's you get to knock the creature to the ground or push it 5 feet backwards. So you could either shove it to the ground, you could, hypothetically, if you're in this situation and Jerry shoved Matt back 5 feet, he could shove him off the battlement. Just to give a couple options there. But if Matt beat Jerry's attempt, nothing would happen. So that's the easy one. The other one is a little trickier. So grappling, same kind of thing. You use your attack action to do a grapple. The creature can't be more than one size larger than you. And it starts off the same way with a contested roll. You have to have a free hand to grab the person. So if you had a sword and a shield, you'd have to drop your shield, or drop your sword, one of the two. So you two would have your roll off, and then if the grappler was successful, they would grab the person, have them in their hand. So what happens when you have someone grappled? So their speed gets dropped to 0, and they have to try and overcome your grapple at that point in order to move again. Otherwise, they're stuck. So if Jerry grabbed Matt, they're grappling. Matt can't move. There's nothing Matt can do now if he wants to get away. The one thing that he can do is use the escape action. So on his turn, he can use his action to do another roll off. If he's successful, he gets away. But yeah, the other thing is, if you've got someone grappled, so let's say Jerry had Matt grappled, but Jerry wanted to drag Matt somewhere, they're able to move, but it counts as difficult terrain, so Jerry could only drag Matt 15 feet. So Jerry won the grapple. He's going, all right, you're coming with me. 1, 2, 3. That's as far as Jerry can get with Matt. And then Matt could take another opportunity to try and escape from him on his turn or whatever else. Or maybe maybe Matt tries to grapple Jerry back. And then they're both grappling each other. And that's just a mess, because they'd have to escape from each other's grapple at that point. Yeah. One other thing to note about the escape, so hypothetically, if your character were, say, tied up, they might have to make additional checks. It's not just a special roll or something, or like a contested roll. So if they had kind of captured Matt and brought him in for questioning, it wouldn't be as easy as him just having a contested roll. He'd have to try and escape the ropes and then try to escape Jerry. There's a whole other element to that. So yeah, that kind of covers things as a overall view at your options on your turn. So to reiterate, you can move on your turn. Your character will have a base movement speed of 30 feet. You can break it up, so you could move 10 feet, do your action, and then move 20 feet. You can drop to the ground, you can get back up from the ground, you can jump, you can swim, you can climb, you have a lot of different options. But all of those options can be broken up in between your actions and such. Also on your turn, you get one action and one bonus action, unless you have like a special class feature or something that lets you do something else. Haste, for example, gives you a bonus or a second action on your turn. Fighters get one called Second Wind. Just to name some examples of people that get additional actions or conditions. Bonus actions, you get one of those per turn as well. And then you get one reaction in your turn that you can use if the situation comes up. Yeah. So take hold of this quick reference guide, kind of read it over yourselves as well, make sure you understand what you're looking at. Next time I do something like this, we'll be digging into how spells work. So thanks for hanging out, and I will catch you next time. Have a great day, everyone.